When the stars went silent, the crimson dust of Zerion 7 swirled like angry ghosts around the makeshift barricades as another wave of plasma fire scorched the air above Captain Marcus Kane's head. He pressed himself against the twisted metal of what used to be mining platform Delta, his breathing heavy through the cracked visor of his emergency suit. Around him, the last defenders of Meridian Colony fired back with mining lasers and construction tools, their desperate shots barely scratching the advanced armor of the Krillian war machines. "Status report," Marcus shouted over the screaming of energy weapons and the thunderous march of approaching alien forces. His voice carried the weight of a man who had watched his world burn for 3 days straight. "Eastern sector is completely gone, Captain," came the crackling response from Lieutenant Jake Morrison, his usually calm voice tight with exhaustion. "We've lost the processing facility and the residential blocks. Civilian evacuation to the underground bunkers is at 70%, but we're running out of time and ammunition." Marcus peered around the edge of his cover, his gray eyes taking in the horrifying sight of the Krillian ground assault. The insectoid aliens moved in perfect formation, their chitinous armor gleaming like black oil in the light of burning buildings. 6-legged war mechs stalked between infantry units, their massive plasma cannons reducing human structures to smoking ruins with casual efficiency. Just 4 months ago, Meridian Colony had been a thriving operation. 8,000 colonists had called this harsh desert world home, mining the rare crystalline deposits that powered faster-than-light drives across the galaxy. They had followed all the proper procedures, filed the correct territorial claims, and even paid the ridiculous fees to the Galactic Commerce Authority. When the Krillian Empire had arrived claiming ancient territorial rights, the humans had politely shown their legal documentation. The Krillians had responded with orbital bombardment. Dr. Jennifer Walsh crawled up beside Marcus, her scientific equipment abandoned for a military-grade pulse rifle. Her red hair was singed and dirty, her lab coat replaced by salvaged armor plating. "Marcus, the quantum communicator is ready," she said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and barely controlled fear. "If we're going to send that distress signal, it has to be now. The power core won't hold much longer." Marcus nodded grimly. They had managed to cobble together a long-range quantum transmitter from mining equipment and the colony's research facilities. It was their last hope of reaching Earth or any of the major galactic powers for help. The problem was that Zerion 7 sat in the Outer Rim territories, and the Krillians had already destroyed their main communication array with surgical precision. "Send it on all emergency frequencies," Marcus ordered. "Military channels, diplomatic, networks, even the smuggler routes. Someone out there has to care about 8,000 innocent people." Jennifer's fingers danced across her improvised console, her scientist's mind adapting to the desperate technology they had created. Message transmitted on all available channels, broadcasting human emergency codes, our coordinates, and a full tactical assessment. "If anyone's listening, they'll know exactly what we're facing." Marcus allowed himself a moment of hope. The Altarian Federation had a reputation for peacekeeping missions. The Zenthari Collective maintained trade agreements with Earth and had shown sympathy for smaller species before. Even the isolationist Corvan Republic had occasionally intervened when civilian populations were threatened. Surely someone would answer their call for help. But as the hours crawled by and the Krillian siege tightened around their position, no response came. Light years away, in the gleaming crystal spires of the Altarian capital, Federation Admiral Kylan Var studied the human distress signal on his holographic display. His ethereal blue features showed genuine concern as he absorbed the desperate plea from the doomed colony. Around the emergency council table, other Federation officials discussed the situation in hushed, worried tones. "The humans are requesting immediate military intervention," reported his aide, a young Altarian named Desk. "They claim the Krillian Empire has launched an unprovoked attack on their legally established mining operation. Casualty estimates suggest complete extinction of the colony within 48 hours. Admiral Kylan Var activated additional displays, showing the tactical situation in the Zerion system. How many Krillian ships are we detecting? Long-range sensors indicate at least 60 vessels, including 5 heavy battle cruisers and multiple troop transports. The humans appear to have no military presence whatsoever, only civilian transports and industrial equipment. The council chamber fell silent. Everyone present understood the implications. The Krillian Empire was one of the galaxy's major military powers, with a history of aggressive expansion and zero tolerance for opposition. To challenge them directly would mean a galactic war that could consume millions of lives across dozens of worlds. Send a formal diplomatic protest to the Krillian High Command, Admiral Kylanvar decided after a long pause. Express our grave concerns about civilian casualties and call for immediate ceasefire negotiations. And the humans, sir? The admiral's luminous eyes dimmed with genuine sadness. Send them our deepest sympathies and assurance that we are working through diplomatic channels. That's all we can do without triggering a war that would destroy far more lives than we could save. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. The Zinthari Collective's Hive Mind Council debated for 18 hours before concluding that direct intervention would violate their non-interference protocols. The Corvan Republic expressed formal regret, but cited their own border disputes with the Krillians as justification for non-involvement. Smaller species that might have been willing to help lacked the military strength to make any meaningful difference. Back on Zerion 7, Marcus and his defenders were down to their last ammunition reserves. The colony's energy shields had failed completely, and Krillian shock troops were advancing through the outer settlements. The underground bunkers were packed with terrified civilians, including hundreds of children whose only crime had been being born human on a world the Krillians wanted. "Captain, we're picking up something unusual on long-range sensors," Dr. Walsh called out, her voice cutting through the sound of nearby explosions. "Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. Configuration unknown." Marcus felt his heart leap. "Is it Earth Fleet, one of the Federation response forces?" Jennifer frowned at her readings, her scientific training taking over despite the chaos around them. "Negative. These ships don't match any human design in our database. Energy signatures are completely unfamiliar. Definitely not any of the major galactic powers we have files on." Through his tactical scope, Marcus could see that the Krillian forces had suddenly paused their advance. Their commanders were clearly receiving reports about the new arrivals, and for the first time in 3 days the aliens seemed uncertain. For several tense minutes nothing happened. Then Jennifer's equipment exploded with activity. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's on an encrypted military frequency, but our computer is somehow translating it automatically." The voice that came through their speakers was distinctly human, but with an accent Marcus didn't recognize. It was deep and resonant, carrying an edge of controlled violence that made his spine tingle. "Human settlement under siege. This is Fleet Commander Axel Cross of the Reaper Battalion. We have intercepted your distress call and are conducting tactical assessment. Prepare for immediate combat support." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Every spacer in the Outer Rim had heard whispers about the Reaper Battalion. They were human mercenaries who had been exiled from Earth space decades ago, for reasons that varied depending on who told the story. Some said they were war criminals. Others claimed they were patriots who had been betrayed by their own government. What everyone agreed on was that they were the most dangerous human fighting force ever assembled. "Dr. Walsh," Marcus said quietly, "are you absolutely certain our message went out on emergency frequencies only?" Jennifer checked her transmission logs, her face growing pale. "Affirmative, but Captain, the Reaper Battalion doesn't typically respond to distress calls. They're mercenaries. They work for whoever pays them the most." "Or," Marcus said, watching as unknown ships began moving in the darkness above, "they work for whoever they choose to work for." In orbit above Zerion 7, the black ships of the Reaper Battalion hung against the stars like predatory birds. Their vessels were modified human designs, bristling with weapons that had been outlawed in civilized space. No identification lights marked their positions, and their hulls seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light from the system's star. On the bridge of the flagship Eternal Fury, Fleet Commander Axel Cross stood before a holographic display showing the tactical situation below. He was tall and lean, his weathered face marked by scars from a dozen different conflicts. His eyes were the color of winter storms, and they studied the human defensive positions with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. The colonists are fighting well for civilians, observed his tactical officer, Captain Victoria Martinez. Her call sign was Steel, and she had earned it through 15 years of combat in the Outer Rim Wars. But they're completely outmatched. The Krillians will overrun them within hours. Axel nodded slowly. The Reaper Battalion had intercepted the human distress call while passing through this sector, heading toward a lucrative contract in the Vega system. Standard procedure would be to ignore it and continue on their way. The battalion owed nothing to Earth. Nothing to these colonists and nothing to anyone except themselves. But something about the transmission had caught his attention. The colonial commander's voice had carried no begging, no promises of payment, no desperate bargaining. Just a simple statement of facts delivered with quiet dignity. They were under attack, they were outgunned, and they needed help. It was the kind of message a professional soldier might send. "Show me their defensive positions," he ordered. The hologram shifted, displaying the layout of Meridian Colony and the positions of the human defenders. Axel studied it with the eye of a veteran warrior. The colonists had formed a defensive perimeter around their civilian shelters, using mining equipment and industrial materials to create surprisingly effective fortifications. Their positions showed tactical awareness and a willingness to sacrifice themselves to protect non-combatants. "Zara 9, he called to the ship's AI assistant. "Open a channel to the colonial commander." The artificial intelligence, housed in a humanoid android body, turned from her station. Her synthetic features were perfectly human, except for the subtle, blue glow of her optical sensors. "Channel open, Commander Cross." "Human Colonial Commander, this is Fleet Commander Axel Cross. What is your current tactical situation?" There was a pause before the response came. When it did, the voice was steady despite the sound of weapons fire in the background. "Commander Cross, this is Captain Marcus Kane. We have approximately 300 combat-capable personnel remaining, but most are miners and technicians with limited military training. We're facing an estimated 6,000 Krillian ground troops plus armor and air support. We're outnumbered 20 to 1. "And your objective, Captain Kane?" "Our objective is to protect 8,000 civilian colonists in underground shelters and buy time for evacuation. We're not fighting to win, Commander. We're fighting to make sure our people have a chance." Axel was quiet for a long moment, his storm gray eyes reflecting something that might have been respect. In all his years of warfare, he had learned that there were two kinds of people in the galaxy: those who ran when faced with impossible odds and those who stood their ground. The second type were rare, and they were always worth fighting beside. "Captain Kane," he said finally, "maintain your positions. Do not surrender. Do not retreat. We are coming." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus staring at his communication device in stunned silence. Around him, the other defenders looked equally amazed. "Captain," Lieutenant Morrison said slowly, "did the most feared human mercenaries in the galaxy just tell us they're coming to help?" Marcus looked up at the sky where dark shapes had begun to move among the stars. For the first time in 3 days, he allowed himself to smile. "I think they just did, Lieutenant. I think they just did. Sometimes the wolves come to save the sheep." The wolves answer the call. The first sign that everything had changed came when the Krillian orbital bombardment suddenly stopped. For 3 days straight, the insectoid invaders had maintained a steady rain of plasma fire on Meridian Colony. But now an eerie silence settled over the battlefield. Captain Marcus Kane pressed his eye to his rifle scope, scanning the alien positions across the devastated mining complex. "They've pulled back their forward assault units," he reported to his remaining squad leaders. "Something has them spooked. In 15 years of military service, I've never seen Krillians retreat from anything." Dr. Jennifer Walsh looked up from her sensor array, her face pale with disbelief. "Marcus, I'm reading massive energy signatures in high orbit. The Reaper Battalion ships are moving into attack formation, and the Krillian fleet is actually repositioning defensively." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The Krillian Empire had conquered over 60 worlds in the past 2 centuries. Their military doctrine was built on overwhelming force and absolute ruthlessness. They didn't adopt defensive postures when facing smaller fleets, and they certainly didn't show caution when dealing with what should have been a handful of human mercenary ships. But apparently, they made exceptions for the Reaper Battalion. The command center of the Krillian flagship Swarm's Dominion, General Theron Blackfire, studied the tactical displays with growing unease. His insectoid features were frozen in what humans might recognize as worry, his compound eyes reflecting the red glow of warning signals across his bridge. His clawed hands clicked nervously against his command throne as he processed the implications of what his sensors were telling him. How many human vessels? He chittered to his tactical officer in their harsh native language. 22 confirmed. Ship, Supreme General. All appear heavily modified for combat. Configuration suggests mercenary fleet, not official military. However, the officer's voice trailed off nervously. However what? Blackfire's voice carried the edge of barely controlled anger. However, these energy signatures match historical records of the human forces that destroyed the Vaxian Third Fleet at Rigel 7. The same ships that broke the consortium blockade at New Ceres. General, these are the humans they call the Reaper Battalion. Blackfire felt his secondary heart skip a beat. Every military academy in the galaxy taught case studies about human mercenary tactics. The Reaper Battalion was featured prominently in those lessons as an example of what happened when humans were pushed beyond their breaking point. They were the nightmare scenario that kept alien military commanders awake during sleep cycles. Orders, Supreme General? His tactical officer asked. Blackfire considered his options carefully. The smart military decision would be to withdraw immediately and report the human presence to the High Command. But he had already committed massive resources to taking this mining colony, and the Reapers had not yet made any overtly hostile moves. There was still a chance this was coincidence, that the notorious mercenaries were simply passing through and would not interfere with legitimate Krillian territorial expansion. Maintain current positions but cease all bombardment, he ordered. Send a diplomatic query to the human commander. Determine their intentions before we escalate this situation further. On the surface of Zerion 7, Marcus and his defenders watched in amazement as sleek Reaper Battalion dropships descended through the atmosphere like falling meteors. The human craft moved with deadly grace, their hulls scarred by countless battles, as they navigated through the smoke and debris of the war zone. Unlike the organic curves of alien vessels, these ships were all sharp angles and aggressive lines, built by humans for the sole purpose of bringing death to their enemies. The first dropship landed directly in the colony's central plaza, right in the middle of no man's land between human and Krillian positions. For a moment nothing happened. Then the ship's armored ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the warriors inside. Marcus had seen images of the Reaper Battalion before, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of encountering them in person. They emerged from their transport like legends stepping out of nightmare stories. Each warrior was clad in matte black combat armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their helmets were featureless except for glowing red optical sensors that swept the battlefield with mechanical precision. But it was their weapons that truly caught his attention. Every piece of equipment they carried had been modified, upgraded, and optimized for maximum lethality. These were not the standardized weapons of regular military forces. These were the tools of professionals who had turned warfare into an art form. The lead figure stepped forward, his armor bearing the scars of 100 different conflicts. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the battlefield through external speakers, cutting through the sound of distant explosions and alien war cries. I am Fleet Commander Axel Cross of the Reaper Battalion. I would speak with Captain Marcus Kane. Marcus looked around at his defenders. Lieutenant Morrison shook his head vigorously. Captain, it could be a trap. The Reapers are mercenaries. They sell their services to the highest bidder. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But they could have just bombarded our positions from orbit if they wanted us dead. And right now, they're the only thing standing between us and complete annihilation. He stood up from behind his barricade, ignoring the protests of his soldiers, and walked out into the open plaza. Every step felt like it might be his last, but he forced himself to maintain a steady pace. Behind him, He could hear Dr. Walsh whispering prayers and the sound of weapons being readied by his nervous defenders. Commander Cross waited motionless as Marcus approached, his red optical sensors studying the colonial officer with an intensity that was both unnerving and strangely respectful. When Marcus stopped 10 feet away, the mercenary leader inclined his head slightly in what might have been a military salute. "You are the one who commands the Colonial Defense Force," Cross said. It wasn't a question. Captain Marcus Kane, commanding. "Officer of Meridian Colony Defense Force," Marcus replied, matching the formal tone. "You received our distress call." "Your people fight well for civilians," Cross observed, his electronic voice carrying no emotion. "Your tactical dispositions show intelligence and honor, but you cannot prevail against Krillian numbers alone." Marcus nodded grimly. "We know we can't win, Commander. We're not fighting for victory. We're fighting to make sure our people have time to survive." "Your people," Cross repeated, his helmet turning toward the entrances to the underground shelters. 8,000 civilians who never signed up for a war. Children, elderly, families who just wanted to build something in this empty corner of space, Marcus confirmed. "They're depending on us to hold the line." Commander Cross was silent for a long moment, his sensors scanning the human defensive positions. Marcus could sense the mercenary leader analyzing their placement, their fields of fire, the way they had positioned themselves to protect the civilian shelters, rather than to maximize their own chances of survival. "In human military tradition," Cross said finally, "there is a concept called death before dishonor. Most species in this galaxy have forgotten what that means. They choose survival over principle, safety over sacrifice." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What are you saying, Commander?" "I am saying that you and your defenders fight like true humans," Cross replied. "You choose duty over survival. This is admirable." Before Marcus could respond, Cross reached up and removed his helmet, revealing the face beneath. Marcus had expected scars, cybernetic implants, the weathered features of a man who had seen too much war. Instead, he found himself looking at someone who might have been a teacher or an engineer in another life. Cross's eyes were tired but kind, carrying the weight of decisions that had cost him sleep for decades. "Captain Kane," Cross said, his natural voice much softer than the electronic version, "my people and I have been exiled from Earth space for 23 years. We have fought in wars that history will never record, for causes that politicians will never acknowledge. We have been called criminals, terrorists, and worse." Marcus waited, sensing that something important was being shared. "But we have never forgotten what it means to be human," Cross continued. "And humans do not abandon other humans to alien slaughter, not while we still draw breath." The mercenary commander turned toward his dropship and raised one armored hand. Immediately, more transports began descending from orbit, their engines roaring like thunder as they brought reinforcements to the battlefield. But these weren't just soldiers. Marcus could see heavy weapons platforms, mobile shield generators, and combat vehicles that looked like they could punch through a mountain. "Commander," Marcus said carefully, "we can't pay you. The colony's assets are destroyed and Earth won't authorize payment to your organization." Cross looked back at him, and for the first time the mercenary leader smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Captain Kane, there are some things more valuable than money. The Krillians made a mistake when they decided to exterminate human civilians. They are about to learn why that was the worst decision they could have made." As if summoned by his words, Captain Victoria Martinez dropped from her own transport, her pilot's gear replaced by heavy combat armor. Her nickname Steel was earned through years of fighting in the Outer Rim conflicts, and her reputation for aerial combat was legendary, even among the Reapers. "Commander," she reported, her voice carrying the crisp professionalism of a veteran. "Warrior, all drop zones are secure. Heavy weapons teams are in position. Admiral Cross's fleet is moving to engage the Krillian orbital forces." "Admiral Cross?" Marcus asked in confusion. Commander Cross's smile became even more dangerous. "My brother. He handles space combat while I prefer ground operations. Family business, you might say." High above them, the darkness of space suddenly lit up with the fury of human vengeance. The Reaper Battalion's fleet engaged the Krillian armada with a precision and savagery that defied belief. Human ships danced between enemy formations, their weapons tearing through alien armor like paper. Every shot was calculated, every maneuver planned, every attack designed to cause maximum damage with minimal risk. On the ground, Krillian forces found themselves facing an enemy they had never encountered before. Human mercenaries who fought not for money or territory, but for the simple principle that no one threatened their species and lived to tell about it. The battle for Zerion 7 had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn why you never corner humanity. Plasma fire began to light up the sky once again. Marcus Kane stood beside Commander Cross and watched professional human warriors do what they did best. For the first time in 3 days, he believed his people might actually survive. The wolves had come to save the sheep, and they had brought their teeth.